Here we go. Numbers chapter 11. Well, believe it or not, we've made it all the way to Numbers chapter 11. I know for Papa John, it seems like it takes me a while to get there. This is the first chapter for this week's Come Follow Me curriculum. And yet I've done a number of episodes in this book of Numbers. And so why does it take me so long? Because Papa John just can't pass over some of these chapters because I find little tidbits and pearls and some major truths sometimes and insights I just don't want to skip over. So thank you for being patient with me. Let's get into this. Numbers chapter 11, verse 1 with our LDS scholar. He says, the people complained again, Laman's and Lemuel's all. Now, what's that mean? If you're not from the Latter-day Saint Restored Gospel, you don't know perhaps who Laman and Lemuel are. But in the Book of Mormon, these are two brothers, sons of Lehi, that always seem to be complaining. And so this is similar to what we're going to experience here with the children of Israel in chapter 11. It displeased the Lord, but it's all capitals, and so we're going to say the name. Papa John can't resist restoring the name. Once I found out that it had been redacted and whitewashed out of the English version of Scripture, hey, and we're studying the Old Testament this year, I'm going to, every chance I get, restore the name. It was whitewashed. It was redacted over 6,000 times in the Old Testament, but not today. So this verse reads, and it displeased Yehovah. Go figure, right? And Yehovah heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of Yehovah burnt against them and consumed them that were in the outermost parts of the camp. And then Halverson Jared says, catch who were the victims? Those who were furthest away from the tabernacle. Negative attitudes, once they're kindled, do tend to spread. Have you ever seen that happen among a youth group? That one person just has a bad attitude and then it starts to spread like a contagion. It can spread like wildfire. There's this social contagion, and social media really adds to it. It fans the flames, and pretty soon we're all up in arms against God's chosen leaders. But ironically and tragically here, this negative emotion, these uncontrolled pessimistic attitudes spread and end up consuming the very people that kindled them to begin with. That's what happened to them. Well, Moses, ever the mediator, prays for them, and the fire is quenched. As a mediator, he's kind of like a Christ figure. He's stepping in as a mediator on behalf of the children of Israel. And as we scroll, you're going to notice again highlighted divine names, which is just fun. I love restoring the name with all the consonants, reading right to left, the yod, the hey, the vav, the hey, and then we also have the vowel markers, the cholam, the kamats, and the shiva. Pretty cool stuff. Jono Vandor, our messianic believer from down under in Australia, he says, chapter 11, oh my goodness, there's so much here. Let me just tell you in a nutshell what happens. Well, they start to whinge. I don't know. That's some type of Australian word, I guess. Whinge. Whinge. Anyway, they start to have a bit of a whine and they start to complain and they make our Father God angry. And that's not a good thing to do. His anger was aroused, and it says in his verse, in his Bible, it says, so the fire of Yehovah burned among them. And it actually burned among them, meaning we're not talking about some spiritual fire. He's fuming, and it's actually consumed. He consumed some of the people on the outskirts of the camp. And the verse concludes, and there was a fire, and Moses prayed, and the fire was quenched, and they called the place Taberah. And then Nehemiah says in Hebrew that word is vebrator, which means to burn. We're going to scroll here past a few verses. Jono Vandor continues to burn. Okay, now it's almost like a disowning, perhaps, here in verse 4. The mixed multitude, it's their fault. It wasn't necessarily. And then Nehemiah is like, wait, hold on. It didn't or doesn't say the mixed multitude. I'm sorry. Are you kidding me? It doesn't. I don't believe you. It doesn't say that. And Jonah's like, I'm telling you, that's what it says. Now the mixed multitude. And Nehemiah then responds, wow, that's liabus. That's outright liabus to translate that way. And Keith Johnson, our Methodist minister, interjects and says, in mine it reads the rabble with them. And then our Hebrew scholar Nehemiah responds, okay, I'll take the rabble, no problem. Now I'm going to tell you what happened here. There's a group called the mixed multitude who came up with Israel out of Egypt. They were non-Israelites who were joining the people of Israel. They were the sojourners who were circumcised, and they took part of the Passover sacrifice. And then it said there was one Torah for the native born and the sojourner. So they were part of what's called the congregation of Israel. They became part of Israel, and even though they weren't physical descendants of Jacob, that's the mixed multitude, right? In fact, Papa John's going to interject here. Just a reminder, or if you missed the episodes on the Exodus, some of the Egyptians left with the Israelites, with the slaves, perhaps even their masters. Anyway, the Egyptians recognized the power of the true and living God of Israel over the pretender, Pharaoh, and they left with them and were called and considered a mixed multitude until they passed through the Red Sea, which in place was as they passed through that water on dry ground but under sea level. When they came out the other side, about 10-mile long stretch, when they came out the other side, they were no longer a mixed multitude. They were mikvahd, or baptized in the Red Sea, and from then on they were no longer considered mixed. Now back to Nehemiah, he says in Numbers 11 verse 4, the word in Hebrew is Erav, Eravrav, which means many mixed. Literally, you could translate that a mixed many. The word is Asaf Suf, which means literally it's from the word Asaf, which means to gather. So you could really translate Asaf Suf as the mob. It's a group of people who have gathered together, and through the pressure of their gathering and being a large crowd, they're essentially trying to put forward an agenda. That's Asaf Suf. Now, the person who decided to translate Asaf Suf as mixed multitude is slandering the name of the mixed multitude, of the genuine mixed multitude, who were righteous people. And one of the mixed multitude was actually Caleb, who we are told was a Kenizzite, in Hebrew, a Kenizi, who were originally one of the 10 Canaanite tribes at the time of Abraham, who had gone down to Egypt and been enslaved by the Egyptians and decided to leave Egypt with the Israelites. So Caleb was not a physical descendant of Jacob, yet he was allowed to be a representative of the tribe of Judah when they went on their spying mission into the promised land. And well, we'll read about that later, he says, in the book of Numbers. He's one of the two who were loyal to Jehovah, and the other one was Moses and his sidekick, Aaron. So really, Nehemiah continues, he's the only genuine spy who was being loyal to Jehovah, and he was one of the Erev Ra, or the mixed multitude. He was not one of the Asaf Suf, or being part of this group of we call the rabble or the mob, the rabble. That's got a completely different group here. So now Nehemiah is going to explain what happened and why he feels so strongly about this. He says, now where I have got this translation and where they got this translation, frankly, is from the rabbinical tradition that teaches that the Asaf Suf, the rabble, or they are the same as the mixed multitude. And why do they say that, the rabbis? Because they don't want to take blame, the blame of their ancestors being the ones who caused this problem in the desert. They want to say, oh, that's the Gentiles who joined us. That wasn't us. But that's not what it says. It was us. And this is Nehemiah, a Jew, saying this. How transparent is this guy? He's amazing to me. He says, we've got to take credit. We've got to own it. We sinned. We weren't faithful. And what we need to do is repent, not to try to blame someone else. You know, the only thing you can say about some of the Gentiles who joined us is when we were sinning and not trusting Yehovah in the incident of the spy, and one of them was loyal and faithful, and he's referring to Caleb here, and we should hold him up as a picture of what we want to strive for, just like the story of the Rechabites, rather than trying to put them down and slander them and say, they're not one of us, those who rebelled against God. So here's some pictures of birds of quail in the air. What is this about? We're going to go there next. So remember, they're eating manna every day. And on verse 9, and when the dew fell upon the camp, referring to the manna, the night before, the male fell upon it. And then Nehemiah, he says, I've got to point something out. It's kind of ironic. So we've got this word, chiham, which means free. And it says, we ate freely, which means we ate without money. So they're throwing out the word free here, but they're slaves, so they're eating for free, but they're not free men when they ate for free, but they're yearning for the good old days, the great days when we ate for free in Egypt. But now we're free, and so you know what? As a free man, there's consequences and responsibilities for freedom. To be free, the slave doesn't have to worry about what he's going to eat. He's fed by his master. Now these are free men. They've got to stand up as men, and sometimes it's not comfortable or convenient, as it was being a slave, but it's worth the freedom. I love that. Thank you, Nehemiah. Now we're going to skip through some footnotes and a few verses. Notice I continue to highlight every chance I get in turquoise blue the divine name. Verse 11, and Moses said unto Jehovah, wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? So Moses is talking to God, and guess what? He's going to start to complain. Again, negative energy kind of begets more negative energy. He says, wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, speaking to God, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Have I conceived all these people? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldst say unto me, carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth the sucking child, unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? So our LDS scholar adds, Moses is at the end of his rope, and I can't blame him. He's been going through this for the past year plus, and now, well, it's gotten to him. He's to a breaking point. It's like, God, I didn't give birth to these people. They're not mine. He's frustrated. And Jared says, I do love the way he puts it. Am I a nursing father? And the reason, of course, Jared loves that is because that's from the words of Isaiah. And he'll speak those, speaking of the last days, when he says, kings will become the nursing fathers and queens their nursing mothers of scattered Israel. So Moses on his best day is willing, but yet Moses still, we still need you to be their nursing father in the perspective of God. They are infants after all, but let's lead them along. They'll grow up in God. I'm patient. I'm eternal. I guess I can afford to be. Let's see what they'll do. So that's actually well spoken. Now, Jared Halverson continues. In verse 13, Moses continues his frustration. Whence should I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, give us flesh that we may eat. I am not able to bear all this people alone. And then Halverson says, which is exactly why Jethro taught him. Delegate, Moses, because it's too heavy for you. Why do you think Aaron and Hur were there to hold up your hands, your heavy hands during the battle? Again, Jared Halverson continues with verse 15. If thou deal thus with me, he continues to complain. Moses says, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand, if I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. And then Halverson says, I don't know if there's a lower point for Moses than this one. Did you catch all of his pronouns? As President Packer used to say, but the I pronoun, that's the biggest problem of all. I can't do it. I can't do it alone. Why would you do this to me? It's too heavy for me. Let me not see my wretchedness. All personal pronouns there. But Moses, this was never about you. It's okay. I just need you to look to me in faith and then look to them in mercy and love and do the very best you can. But this is a hard moment for Moses. There's a moment in Brigham Young's experience as they were crossing the plains, as Brigham Young has often been called the American Moses in leading modern Israel to a new promised land. And he gets frustrated on occasion. In fact, let me interject here. Papa John going to pause on the Jared Halverson footnote, but he brings up Brigham Young. And if you're not familiar with the history of the restored gospel and the Latter-day Saints, it began in America on the East Coast in upstate New York. And they've moved to Illinois, they've moved to Ohio, and the persecution is kind of tough. And they actually start this trek across northern America into out of the country into the territories that haven't become states yet. They end up in Utah, and it's just an amazing story. And there's parallels there. And so even Brigham Young gets uh, frustrated. At one point, he said, Halverson quotes him here. It says, Brigham says, unless this people were more united in spirit and ceased to pray against counsel, it will bring me down to my grave. I'm reduced in flesh. My coat that would scarcely meet around me last winter now laps over 12 inches. It is with me ado, or it is what with much ado that I keep from lying down and sleeping to wait for the resurrection. Halverson says, wow, Brigham lost a lot of weight. He's probably lost a lot of sleep, and now he's beginning to lose a lot of patience. Come on, Israel, you're better than this. And Moses is feeling the same way right here in the book of Numbers. Well, God tells Moses to gather the 70 elders of Israel, just like he had done back at Sinai. Bring them to the tabernacle, and I'll give them their marching orders from here. Now, just before we continue, to interrupt, because Brother Howerson brought up Brigham Young, it reminded me of an old classic black and white film called Brigham Young from 1940. Amazing movie, not always as Hollywood does, it's not always factual, but somewhat well done. And I remember as a boy watching it on TV, old black and white movie, and realizing, they had some big name stars for Hollywood in this movie. Kind of odd to do a movie. Now, the Ten Commandments movie, it was on that type of scale, although black and white. The Ten Commandments was filmed in 1956, so that was 16 years later. So this is an old black and white. If you care to watch old black and white movies, you might. And if you've never heard of the American Exodus, this is an attempt to tell that story. And it's quite interesting to Papa John that the fact that the Israelites, when they finally get to the promised land, they settle in an area which is not far from what's called the Dead Sea. And Salt Lake City is named after the American Dead Sea, the Salt Lake. So there's just interesting parallels. And if you've never been made aware of that, check it out. These are some interesting production facts about the cast and extra and how size is a massive set as they built towns and tore them down and tried to, well, film a movie on a large scale. And even back there in 1940, they spent $2,700,000, which was quite high to make a movie. The shoot lasted 133 days. Check it out if that interests you. Let's continue now with the story. Verse 16. And Jehovah said unto Moses, again, gather me 70 men of the elders, and they're going to meet at the tabernacle. And then our LDS scholar continues with verse 17. I will come down and talk with thee there, and I will take of the spirit which is upon thee. So he's speaking to Moses, the spirit upon you, Moses, and will put it upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with thee, that thou bear it not thyself alone. And this kind of hints back to what Jethro was saying. You can't do this by yourself. Halverson says, see, it was never about you, Moses. It was about the Spirit, my Spirit, that I put upon you. That was our first conversation. Remember back at the burning bush? When you were sitting there saying, me, I can't do it. And God said, I know, but I can. So just be my servant, Moses. And Moses realizes, okay, I'm doing it again. And God says, this time I'll say it all over again, but in the presence of these 70 elders, so that they realize, and then they realize I'm with you, and then you'll be reminded that I'm with you. And they'll realize that I'm with you and them. A portion of that same spirit will I put upon them, and therefore they'll be able to bear part of this burden also. Beautiful. Verse 18, and say thou unto the people, sanctify yourselves against to tomorrow, and ye shall eat flesh, for ye have wept in the ears of Jehovah, saying, who shall give us flesh to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore Jehovah will give you flesh, and ye shall eat. Now, Jared Halverson says, you're accusing God of being a worse taskmaster, a slave master than the Egyptians. You're saying at least the Egyptians gave us fish and cucumbers and leeks. Fine. I will provide you with exactly what you're asking for, flesh to eat. Prepare yourselves. Prepare yourselves for an abundance, but it's going to come with some strings attached, just like it did back in Egypt when your slave masters were in control of your lives. Okay, so God's basically saying, then fine, if you cannot handle these small and simple daily portions, the grains and goodness of such, I'm giving you manna morning by morning, and you want something more? Fine. Here we go. Fasten your seatbelts. As I'm scrolling, here we go. Verse 19, ye shall not eat 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but even a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils. It will be loathsome unto you, because that ye have despised Jehovah, which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why came we, why came we forth out of Egypt? Be careful with what you ask for, Jared says. If you want it, fine, I'll give it to you. I will give you so much of it that it's more than you can bear. It'll be coming out of your nostrils. You will be vomiting this meat you've been lusting for until you're so sick of it, you don't even want to see it again. And that's exactly what happens in these next few verses. We're going to continue, though. But Nehemiah Gordon, he has an insight here. He says, so you know what this reminds me of when I read this? I think this is from a movie. I want to say it was called Brewster's Millions, from like in the 1980s. I don't remember, but there's this movie where he catches the boy smoking, and instead of saying don't smoke, what he says is, you want to smoke? Okay. And he locks him in a closet and gives him a box of cigars and says, don't come out until you've finished all the cigars. And that's what God has just done. He did. You want meat? Okay. Meat is back on the menu, boys. I'm going to give you some meat, and you're going to eat that meat until it comes out of your nose. Oh, this sounds terrible. I'm going to scroll some more. Sorry for skipping so many verses and footnotes. But here we are at verse 27, and back to our LDS scholar, Jared Halverson. Now, verse 27, and the plot line changes, the subject changes. There ran a young man, he told Moses, and said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of his young men, answered and said, my lord Moses, forbid them. Now, when it says my lord, notice it's lower case letters. There's no capital L or ORD. What does that mean? That's actually like speaking man to man and speaking to Moses as, my Lord or my master, or, it's like he's just respecting his office. But this isn't the God's name. And I just want you to notice, if you didn't notice, this is why it's important to understand the italicized words and how, when it references the Lord or God, if it's capitalized or not. This is important in the English language. All right, so they assume, Howerson says, there's only one right way of doing things. It's Moses or nobody else. It's like, hey, there's Moses and there's those other 70 elders of Israel. They think there's only one way of doing this. This young man's freaking out about it. It's outside the box, and even Joshua was freaking out about it. Tell them to stop prophesying. But what's Moses's response? Well, it's classic. Verse 29, and it's a famous verse. Jared Halverson says, Moses said unto him, enviest thou for my sake? Would God that all of Jehovah's people were prophets, and that Jehovah would put his spirit upon them. And then he continues, Jared says, Joshua, you don't have to be any more offended by this than I would be. And I'm not offended at all. If anybody should be feeling jealous, it's me, Moses, and I'm not jealous at all. So envious thou for my sake? I am actually so relieved. I didn't want any of these burdens to begin with. I was this close to turning my back on all of you just a moment ago, but God said he would raise up others to help bear the burden, and I'm thrilled. So I'm not envious at all. Then Halverson's going to apply it to our day. He says it's actually interesting looking back to early LDS church history and the mistakes that we've made or the problems that have taken place. But Halverson says, I do worry sometimes when I hear people wrestling over these historical situations, and just justifiably so, but sometimes I worry, envious thou for their sake? Are you more offended by this than the people who actually suffered through those periods? There's a safety in playing armchair historian from the comfort of a 21st century perspective. And then he continues, and to think, how dare they practice plural marriage? That was wrong. And that racism was absolutely unjustifiable in any way. Well, to a degree, Halverson says, I might agree with some of that. But are you more offended than the people who actually went through it? Because those people who practiced plural marriage, as difficult as it was, they did so because they had a testimony of it. I'm amazed, Halverson continues, at the courage and the strength of Elijah Abels and the Jane Elizabeth Manions of the world. And the African American Latter-day Saints of the day might be saying to someone with sympathy symptoms here in the 21st century, envious now thou for my sake? Are you offended for my sake? Because I went through it, and yes, it was hard, and yes, I prayed for different outcomes, which eventually came, but I knew the gospel was true, and I followed Joseph Smith, and I followed Brigham Young, and I followed God's chosen prophets, and I trusted that God would someday make right anything that might be wrong. And he did. Halverson again continues, I hope I'm not saying this from the comfort of a privileged position, because my heart does go out to those who have suffered in the past and in the present. But I think there's a danger in assuming that God isn't helping them through their trials, and we being angry when they are less so. And perhaps they were not angry at all. God has been carrying me through this and confirming my faith and strengthening my testimony through all of it. He's willing to do the same for you if you'll turn to him. Be careful with that phrase, envious now for my sake, or being offended for someone else's. And back to what Moses said in the next sentence, Halverson says, I wish everyone was a prophet, lowercase p. I wish everyone had the Spirit of God upon them. It's the only thing that's lifted me up above my natural man, and that's the prayer of every prophet. We see it in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 84:23. Moses sought diligently to sanctify his people that they might behold the face of God. This is all I've ever been dreaming of. I was lonely at Mount Sinai. I wanted the whole house of Israel to up there with me. So if everyone else can become prophets, then all the better. Let's do this book of Revelation. What is the spirit of prophecy? It's the testimony of Jesus. And that's something we should all have. We should all be prophets in that light. You see, spiritual gifts really are meant for all the people, not just for the prophets. And Moses wants us all to grow up in God and live into those spiritual gifts. Why do you think every commandment of the law was given through Exodus and Leviticus? Holiness to Yehovah. Once it's on your mind, we won't need the garments of the high priesthood. We'll be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's what I'm after. Beautiful. Again, Halverson is gifted in his ability to apply the scriptures to our day. Very powerful. I love this chapter, and I can see why it's part of this year's curriculum that we study from it. I'm skipping quite a few verses here. We're back to Jono after verse 34, actually 31. Jono from Australia says, verse 31, then there's a wind that went out from Jehovah, and it brought quail from the sea and left them fluttering near the camp about a day's journey. And so what happens is, it says here, Nehemiah, and what is a cubit? Nehemiah says that's a good question, because there are different cubits. There was the Egyptian cubit and the Babylonian cubit and the cubit of the temple. But a cubit, roughly, the literal meaning of the word amah or cubit is forearm. We measure things in the Western world, or I guess in America they measured it in feet. And the Hebrews, they measured it in the size of the forearm. I'm guessing different forearms are different sizes, just like different feet are different sizes, but it's roughly, they say, I think it's something like 18 inches or a half a meter or something like that. And Jono says, so maybe 2.5 feet is a cubit. I mean, there's at least 2 feet above the surface of the ground of quail. 2 feet of quail, like one quail isn't even 1 foot. I mean, that's a lot of quail. I get disgusted just thinking about that much bird in one place, that much, that thick on the ground. They will ask for meat. Well, it's on the menu. And I get that from Lord of the Rings. Meat is back on the menu, boys. Now, Keith Johnson, our Methodist minister, says, well, one thing I just want to say again, and this idea of what's happening in this story as we're reading the narrative here, and the word that jumps off that ties these together. There's one word that jumps off the page in both stories that tie these stories together. So if you start with the issue of the need for the people that begin to complain, and he says, I'm going to send this quail. And in the middle of the quail, you have the decision, uh, the dissension or decision about the Spirit falling. Okay, dissension about the Spirit falling on the men. And that's the connector. It's the ruach. That's a really hard word for Papa John. Ruach means wind or the Spirit. So the ruach falls upon the men, and the ruach brings the quail. So this wind, in the beginning, back in the book of Genesis, it says, and the ruach was hovering over the face of the deep. So the Spirit. And so what's so cool about this, if I'm reading this in my NIV Bible, of course, I may not see the connection between the Spirit and the wind. But if I'm reading it in the Hebrew, I definitely see the connection between the English word spirit and wind, because it's this idea of this breath, of this blowingness. And where does that come from? The one who sent it, the Ruach, and the wind is Jehovah. So and that's the connection in this chapter. So thank you to our Methodist minister for a beautiful Hebrew insight. And then Nehemiah, our actual Hebrew scholar, he says the word is kibrot hata'ava, which means the graves of lust, because they were lusting for the meat. To me, this story is about being ungrateful. I mean, they literally had manna from heaven. I mean, not figuratively, they literally had manna from heaven. And they said, we're sick and tired of this manna from heaven. We want some good old meat and potatoes. And you know, God is just like, are you kidding me? And that's the end of the episode. But let me just add one more thing. Papa John, I've often thought, if Moses got what he wanted and all men could begin to prophesy like prophets, and what if Papa John had a vision and I shared it with people? In my mind, there's two responses. The first response from most people would be, I think Papa John's lost it. I think he's one step too far. He's past the point. I think he's crazy. And you know what? I would agree with them. That's just the honest truth. I'm not looking for followers. And I hope, even though I do these Papa John episodes, that you understand it's for my children. And my current children, I have 4 children, and then I have 9 grandchildren, 8 living. I've got a son that's going to get married later this year, and so we might have more grandchildren in the future. I do the Papa John episodes because I'm finding and discovering truths, and I'm filling the rib cages of Scripture. Between the verses, I'm stuffing in footnotes from scholars, from Papa John. And what's amazing is they're so powerful, and you'll think you never forget them, but even as I go through these episodes, I discover a new truth. And then I realize, oh, the footnote just below it, I put in 4 years ago. I'd forgotten about this verse. This is such a beautiful thing. So partially this is for my own sanity, and just for the fact that if I learn something, I want to be reminded of it. I don't want to have to start from zero. And I'm hoping my children can benefit from that. And even my extended family today, and my friends that are sharing my life journey. Sometimes I just cross paths with people. Other times it feels like we're sharing the journey together. And it's a faith walk. And sometimes it feels like a faith crisis. But I'm realizing it's just part of the journey. And I'm hoping we can all benefit by strengthening each other and building our faith, and not attacking each other and trying to destroy faith. So again, if someone thought I was crazy when I shared something, even in my Papa John episodes, I kind of would say, yeah, I understand your doubts. You have valid concerns. I would relate to that more so than the second group that would say, hey, Papa John, that's an amazing vision or truth that you shared. We will follow you. And those are the ones that would scare me. I'm not looking for followers, but I am looking to be an example of the believers and to fellowship with my my friends and family within whatever church you come from. It's important that as believers we band together. It's a wicked world out there. There's a lot of confusion, but that's just our turn to almost get it right. I'm grateful for the gospel. I'm grateful for the Old Testament and the insights that have helped me appreciate the Judeo roots of the Christian faith. Between now and the next episode, do your best to think about these things. Don't let it overwhelm you. I know there's a lot of episodes. If you miss a few, that's okay. But be an example of the believers. And I look forward to spending more time with you in the next episode. I'll talk to you guys again soon.